What? Oh, right. Y'all probably want another Curator on the Loose video. Oh, perfect. Today, we're going to talk about Seattle's aviation history. And since we're here at the museum, we're going to get this guy who wrote the book to be our guide. It's going to be awesome. And I'm Matthew Burchette, and I guess this is Curator on the Loose. If you don't know, this is part of the Museum of Flight, and this is also part of the Museum of Flight. Tim Nelson, you are one of our docents, one of our volunteers, and an author of a book on Seattle aviation history.
That's right.
Called Jet City Rewind. That is very cool. Now, what confuses me is we are going to start an episode right here on Seattle's aviation history. Other than the Museum of Flight, I'm confused. What's going on?
Well, it turns out here at the museum, we're standing on hallowed ground for aviation in the state of Washington. Why don't we go stand on that ground right over here?
Ooh, okay. I will tread lightly. This is
We're here.
This is the spot then. Okay.
The museum is situated on grounds that are right next to where a horse racing track used to be called the Meadows around 1910.
Yeah?
What does horse racing have to do with aviation, you ask?
You read my mind.
Well, it turns out this spot, basically right here, is where the first airplane flight occurred in the state of Washington.
No way.
And a guy named Charles Hamilton was doing a tour, which included a stop in Seattle, March 1910. He was flying for Glenn Curtiss, one of the early big names in aviation, exhibiting his products. So he came, he did a practice flight on March 11th, 1910, and that practice flight was the first airplane flight in the state.
That's really cool.
That was a Friday. The next 2 days, he intended to do big demos for the public. Saturday, they estimate about 10,000 were here for his exhibition. He did several maneuvers. He ended up crashing in an infield pond at the racetrack. He was fine, but that was the end of the flying for the day. But a bunch of people saw an airplane fly for the first time in the state of Washington, presumably people like Bill Boeing and people that would someday work for Bill Boeing. So kind of a big deal, and it's right here at the museum.
One of the great things about your book is that you have areas all across Seattle where things have happened. Let's go see some of those.
Let's do it.
What do you think our first stop should be?
Well, why don't we go back even a year or two before Hamilton flew at the Meadows in an airplane and talk about the first controlled flight that anyone made in the area in a balloon.
Ooh, all right.
It's that away.
That away. Let's go. All right, Tim. The Meadows I get. That looks like an aviation kind of spot to me, but we got nothing but water out here. Where have you brought me?
Well, back in 1908, all that we see here used to be Luna Park, a big amusement park. Really big deal. They called it Seattle's Coney Island. They had a huge carousel. They had games. You know, it was just a big summer entertainment deal for the people of Seattle.
That is really cool.
And it was only in business for maybe 5 years. Shut down by about 1913.
Oh, that's too bad.
But there was a local fella named Guy Mecklem who was what used to be called a daredevil.
Oh.
He designed and built his own dirigible A dirigible is a balloon that can be steered. It had a
Okay.
motor and it had a rudder. And he staged an exhibition here at Luna Park, which became the very first human-controlled flight in the area. So
okay.
that happened in late June 1908. His first flight, the gas bag of his football-shaped balloon ruptured, dumping him into Elliott Bay. He was fine. He got it put back together. But anyway, for anyone that saw that demo, it was the first time they had seen a human in the air. On July 4th, he staged a race between his dirigible and two cars between here back to the meadows.
No way. Okay,
And
who won?
he won. He won by
Really?
2 minutes.
Wow. Must have been traffic.
Sure, it's always traffic in Seattle.
Yeah, no kidding. Where to next?
Let's go to Harbor Island,
Ooh.
the scene of some early aviation activity by several people, but we're going to talk about one in particular.
Ooh, all right, I love it. Let's do this. Harbor Island. All right, Tim. Again, this does not look very aviation related, but I'm sure with your vast knowledge of Seattle aviation, you will be able to tell us what happened here.
Well, we've come to the very gritty industrial part of town, Harbor
Mhm.
Island, which is a completely artificial island that
Really?
was started to be built in the
Okay.
early 1900s, and it became a bit of a hotbed of local aviation around 1911 or so, in the early teens of the last century, presumably because it was flat. Seattle's kind of a hilly town. You
Yeah.
look around, where am I going to take off and land an airplane? You know, there's no airports.
Yeah.
This is the early days. So one of the most interesting characters that flew from Harbor Island is a guy that came from Japan, Takayuki Takasow. And he designed and built an airplane, self-taught, and it's the first Seattle-built and flown airplane.
Wow. That's really cool.
He did a famous demo flight in 1913, taking off from Harbor Island and flying around the newly built Smith Tower, public demo.
Wow.
Almost crashed because of the tricky winds.
Oh, that's
there
always
were several
exciting.
other pilots flying that day, but just a cool guy. And his airplanes looked a lot like the Curtiss design, the pusher design.
Yep. Okay.
But he did some innovative things, like his control system. He called it a 3-in-1 control, where the stick push, you control elevator.
Right.
You go side to side, you control aileron, and it was interconnected with the rudder for coordinated turns.
Interesting.
And he had pedals, but they don't do what you'd think they would do. The right pedal was the throttle,
No kidding.
and the left pedal was
the brake?
wheel brake. Real intuitive. But he was an innovative thinker and made some real contributions to local aviation.
So that sounds like that's a whole lot of money in 1913. Was he individually wealthy? How was he getting all this cash?
I don't think he was wealthy, but we do know that he was popular enough with the local community, especially the Japanese community, that they formed a support society,
No.
actually called the Takasow Society,
Whoa.
to help finance his efforts. What we would now think of as sort of a Patreon thing.
Oh, that is really cool.
And it's a reflection of his popularity
Yeah.
and fame.
That is awesome. All right. Where are we going next?
I think we are going to one of the most important Boeing sites in the area, the Duwamish plant, which is long gone.
Yeah, yeah.
But let's go.
All right, I'm here. Tim.
What have I done to you?
Yeah, what? Wow. We're getting less and less aviation related.
No, but we're getting more and more aviation related.
Okay,
But
talk to me.
we're continuing our tour of the gritty side of South Seattle.
Yes, we are.
And we're at the site, we're just across the Duwamish River from the site of the Boeing Duwamish plant, which later became known as Plant 1. It was here that in the 19-teens through the 1930s, that Boeing went from being a cute little local startup company to world famous airplane maker. And a lot of famous Boeing types that we all know and love, like the Model 40 and the Model 80 and the F-4B P-12 fighter series. Those were all made right across the river here, even including the big 314 flying boat final assembly happened over here.
How did they get here?
Around 1910, Bill Boeing had purchased a shipyard that was over here called the Heath Shipyard.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He and his family made their money in lumber and mining, and he was a wealthy man even before the airplane business. But when he was looking for a place to expand and start working on some of these Navy and Army contracts that the company got, this became a logical place to move. By the late 30s, they were outstripping even what this plant could do, and that's what led to Plant 2 being built over at Boeing Field. When Plant 2 was built, then everyone started calling the Duwamish plant Plant 1 after the fact.
Okay. And we know it as the Red Barn.
And the Red Barn was part of that original Heath shipbuilding operation. After Plant 2 was built, this became less and less important. Just machine shops, support activities, sub-assemblies. Later on in the 60s, 50s and 60s, the Boeing turbine division was here. But by the late 60s, Boeing decided we don't really need this anymore. Let's sell it. Sold it to the Port of Seattle. And obviously we have Port of Seattle things going on here today. There is still one building that dates back to the Boeing era at 200 Southwest Michigan Street. It was an engineering administrative building, but that's still there. It looks like it did in the 1930s, but everything else is Port of Seattle now.
Nice. This is really interesting stuff, Tim, I got to tell you. And I keep saying it, you were taking me to all the best places here in Seattle.
I think this is the grittiest. I think we're going less gritty now.
Okay, can we go less gritty?
Let's do it.
Okay, thank you. All right, I gotta admit, Tim, every time we come someplace, I'm a little bit more confused. How does this have anything to do with aviation?
Well, it is a little less gritty than where we just were.
That is true.
But this is a very somber place because this is the site of the XB-29 accident in February 1943, where Eddie Allen and his crew and several folks on the ground lost their lives in a crash at the Fry meatpacking plant. We all know about the Boeing B-29,
right?
Huge industrial program during the war, bigger in fact than the atomic bomb Manhattan Project.
Which is mind-blowing.
Absolutely. But it had significant developmental problems. In fact, the number 2 airplane suffered an engine fire on its very first flight. They got it back on the ground. A few months later, though, that same airplane, number 2, February 1943, was on a test mission out of Boeing Field, developed an engine fire. Eddie Allen was at the controls, tried to get it back to the field, couldn't make it, crashed here. This was a meatpacking plant, so the fire that was started was considered one of the worst in the Seattle Fire Department's history, with all the lard and whatnot mixed with avgas. Just real nightmare for the fire department.
Man, that's horrible. In an earlier episode with the Boeing King County Aviation Rescue firefighters, we actually talked about that. Luther Bonner was the only casualty from that King County squad of firefighters, and still is to this day, which is kind of amazing. Like you said, it's a somber place. Is there a more fun place we're heading?
Well, why don't we go to a lakefront property where they actually built B-29s?
Now we're talking.
All right.
All right. All right, Tim, you got to admit, this is a much better view.
We're moving on up.
Yeah, no kidding. This is amazing, but it's not as cool as that view.
Bingo.
So let's talk about what's going on here.
We are at the site of the Boeing Renton plant, which has been here since the early 1940s. It got its start as a Navy facility. They were gearing up to produce a seaplane that Boeing designed called the Sea Ranger. Not the greatest airplane, they only built one, so they called it
the Lone Ranger.
You got it, Kimosabe.
Yes.
During the war, the plant quickly pivoted to build B-29 bombers. Of the 4,000 or so B-29s that were built during the war, something like 1,100 of them were built here.
No kidding.
And of course today, 737s are still coming
still
out the door.
out. So while this is cool, and I always love looking at pickle planes, right over there is a piece of history that I don't think a lot of people understand is even here.
That's right. There's been a seaplane operation across the Cedar River there for many decades, starting in the 1930s. And why don't we go see if we can get a better view?
I like your idea. All right, so now we got a little better view of that. Tell me a little bit more about Bryn Mawr.
Well, as we mentioned, there has been a seaplane base of some kind at that spot since the 1930s. It's probably most famous for the last modifications to the airplane that Wiley Post and Will Rogers were taking north to Alaska.
Oh, very cool.
They had a Lockheed Orion that had been modified with Lockheed Explorer wings. A lot of hybrid stuff going on with that airplane. And unfortunately, they met an unpleasant end in Alaska with a crash near Barrow. Wiley Post was a famous aviator in the 30s, did several around-the-world flights, high-altitude experimental flights, pressurized suits, weird contraptions that he was looking at. And of course, Will Rogers was a famous humorist, as he called himself. But that area is now called the Will Rogers Wiley Post Memorial Seaplane Base in their honor.
Cool. Tim, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
You're going to have to come back again. This was a lot of fun.
We'll do it. We'll try to be less gritty next time.
I was about to say, I've said it before, but you take us to all the nicest places about Seattle aviation.
My pleasure.
And if you didn't remember, he literally wrote the book, which you can find online, or better yet, in the museum store. And you also need to check out some of our other episodes of Curator on the Loose. They're available on YouTube or the Facebook page. And keep watching, because you never know what we are going to be up to next. You want something, and normally I am all about feeding the animals, because food equals love. I love ducks.